Good morning. Today we are diving into the fascinating world of the second language learner. We will be using the framework established by Douglas Brown to move beyond the old idea that students are blank slates. Instead, we are going to look at them as active investors in their own journey. Let's explore the cognitive and emotional mechanics that make language learning happen. So to start, let's look at the foundational theory of the learner as an investor. So the cognitive domain, it says here that a learner's personal investment of time, effort, and attention is the key to mastery. So, Brown's principle of strategic investment is a game changer. It tells us that mastery isn't just about a teacher's method. It's about the learner's personal investment of time, effort, and attention. So think of it like a bank account. The more attention capital a student puts in, the more fluency and interest they earn. In this section, we will look at learning styles, which are those enduring tendencies that make up your intellectual personality. Like, for example, a student who consistently prefers to visualize words rather than hear them is displaying a learning style. It's a stable preference they bring to every single lesson. Our first major style distinction deals with how we see the world, field independence versus field dependence. It says here that field independence, which is analytical, it distinguishes parts from a whole, meaning seeing the trees, and excels in grammar drills and structural analysis. So think of this as the trees versus the forest debate. In field independence, it is the ability to pick out a specific tree in a crowded forest. These learners are highly analytical. In the classroom, they are the ones who excel at spot the error activities because they can find a single missing S in a massive block of a text. Like for example, during a spot the error activity, and field independence learner quickly identifies a missing S in a third person singular verb within a long paragraph, so they see the specific part amidst the distraction. While field dependence, which is global, it perceives the whole, meaning the forest, and is highly social. It also picks up natural communication and social vibes faster. So meaning field dependence, on the other hand, is the ability to see the forest as a whole. These learners are socially sensitive. They might miss a small grammar rule, but they are masters at picking up the vibe of a room. They thrive in role plays because they focus on making the interaction successful rather than just being grammatically perfect. Like for example, in a group role play, the field dependence learner picks up on the vibe of the conversation. They might miss a grammar rule, but they successfully navigate the social interaction and make the customer feel welcome in a restaurant simulation. While field independence and field dependence is about perception, our next slide looks at how our brains process information fundamentally. So here we are in the left versus right brain. Left brain, which is the rule follower, it says here that it prefers logical, analytical thought, and linear processing. They love structured spreadsheets and vowel shift patterns. While in right brain, which is the immerser, it prefers holistic, emotional, and visual processing. They learn best through mind maps, melodies, and feeding the language. So, we've all heard of left brain and right brain thinkers, but in language learning, the differences are very specific. Left brain learners are your logic-driven students. They love rules and linear processing. You will see them creating detailed spreadsheets of irregular verbs categorized by vowel shift patterns. Like for example, a student who creates a spreadsheet of all irregular past tense verbs categorized by their vowel shift pattern, while right brain learners are holistic, emotional, and visual types. They don't want a list. They want a feeling. They might remember vocabulary better if they draw it in a colorful mind map or if they hear the dialogue set to a catchy melody. Like for example, a student who remembers vocabulary by drawing a mind map with colors and symbols, or who learns a dialogue better when it is set to a melody. Now, let's talk about a psychological trait that often separates those who get stuck from those who keep going. Ambiguity tolerance. It says here that in comfort with the unknown, the degree to which a learner is comfortable with gaps in their knowledge or contradictions in the language. High tolerance learners stay relaxed and follow plots through text, while low tolerance learners stop at every unknown word. So it means that ambiguity tolerance is essentially how comfortable you are with not knowing. High tolerance learners are successful because they don't panic when they encounter a word they don't know. They can watch a movie in English, miss 30% of the words, and still enjoy the plot through context. Like for example, a student watching a movie in English without subtitles, they don't know 30% of the words, but they stay relaxed and follow the plot through context. While in low tolerance learners, however, are tethered to their dictionaries. They often hit mental blocks. Mental blocks because they cannot move past a sentence until every single word makes perfect sense. So this can lead to a lot of frustration when dictionary definitions don't perfectly align with the text. Like for example, a student who stops reading a story every time they hit an unknown word, they become frustrated because the dictionary has three meanings and none of them make sense, eventually giving up. Next, let's look at the speed versus accuracy trade-off, reflectivity and impulsivity. So Brown argues that teaching learners how to learn is just as vital as the language itself. So this is strategy-based instruction, or SBI. We group these tactics into three clusters. The first one is the cognitive, second is metacognitive, and socio-affective. And then socio-affective. So the first one is the cognitive. It says here that direct manipulation of material. It includes deduction and recombination of phrases. So this means that this is the direct manipulation, like using a general rule to build a new sentence, which is deduction. Like for example, using deduction, like applying a general rule, you just learn to produce a brand new sentence. Secondly is the metacognitive. It says here that thinking about thinking. Executive functions like self-evaluation and directed attention. So this means that this is thinking about thinking. It's when a student decides to ignore a distraction like directed attention or checks their own progress, which is self-evaluation. Like for example, self-evaluation, where a student checks their own progress after completing a task to see what they still need to work on. And thirdly is the socio-affective. It says here that it mediating with others, cooperation, and working with peers to solve puzzles. This means that this involves working with others, like cooperating with a peer to solve a language puzzle. Like for example, in cooperation, such as working with a peer to solve a language puzzle together. Okay, so now that we've covered how we think, let's look at how we feel. This section is arguably the most famous part of Brown's work because it deals with the affective principles, meaning the emotional heart of learning. We're going to look at how identity, risk, and anxiety play a role in whether a student actually opens their mouth to speak. Like for example, a student might know the grammar perfectly, but if they are terrified of looking silly, they will never use it. That is the affective domain at work. It says here that exploring the personality factors that determine language success. First up is a concept that explains why learning a language can feel so personal, the language ego. So, it says here that under the vulnerability factor, yourself is threatened when learning a new language. You may feel like a nobody because you cannot express your intellectual self. In classroom implication, teachers must provide a non-threatening environment. If a student is laughed at, their ego creates a wall and learning stops. So this means that the language ego is the identity you develop in relation to the new language. When you learn a new tongue, yourself feels threatened. You might be a brilliant, funny person in your native language, but in the new language, you feel like a nobody because you cannot express your complex thoughts with a toddler's vocabulary. If a student feels laughed at, their ego creates a thick wall and learning effectively stops. So, it says here that the vulnerability factor yourself feels threatened. Like for example, you feel like a nobody because you cannot express their intellectual self through your limited vocabulary. You might have a PhD in your home country, but you feel like a child in the ESL classroom. So in classroom implication, teachers must provide a supportive, non-threatening environment. Like for example, if a student is laughed at for a pronunciation mistake, their language ego creates a thick wall and learning stops immediately. So to break through that wall, students need to be willing to take risks. We are here in the risk-taking and WTC. We have the high risk takers, which means they are fluent but potentially inaccurate. While in low risk takers, it means that they are accurate but silent. But here's the sweet spot. Brown argues that the successful language learner is a moderate risk taker. Willingness to communicate, WTC, is the internal readiness to speak in a specific moment. So this means that Brown argues that the best learners are moderate risk takers. In high risk takers, they speak a lot but can be very inaccurate. Like for example, a student who shouts out answers constantly saying, I goes to store instead of I went. They make mistakes but get much more practice. While in low risk takers, they are accurate but often stay silent. So teachers need to encourage calculated guesses and reward the attempt, not just correctness. This leads to WTC or willingness to communicate, which is that specific internal readiness to speak in a given moment. So influenced by who they are talking to and their self confidence. Like, for example, a student who is usually shy but feels confident enough to speak up because they are talking to a friendly classmate about a topic they love. Our final psychological concept is attribution theory, how students explain their own success or failure. Attribution theory looks at who a student blames for their results. It says here that internal attribution, I failed because I didn't study hard enough. This actually leads to future success. And then in the external attribution, the teacher hates me or the language is too hard. This leads to learned helplessness. This is because internal attribution is when a student says, I failed because I didn't study enough. This is actually good. It means that they believe they have the power to change the outcome the next time. And while in external attribution is when they say the teacher hates me or English is just too hard. So this leads to learned helplessness because they feel they have no control over their success. So, how do we put all of this into practice? Let's look at our final classroom applications. First, lower the affective filter. Use icebreakers and group work to reduce fear of judgment. Use icebreakers so students are not afraid of being judged. Secondly, encourage style awareness. You discuss memorization techniques to identify personal styles. This means that you ask students how they learn something to start a conversation about their unique styles. Like for example, occasionally asking students, how did you memorize those words? Okay class, how did you memorize those words? Or to start a discussion on learning styles. Thirdly, build global self-esteem. Means praise enthusiasm and listening skills, not just perfect grammar. Don't just praise grammar. Praise their enthusiasm and their listening skills. This makes them feel valued as a whole person, not just grammar machine. Like for example, providing praise for things other than just grammar, like saying, I love your enthusiasm, or you are a great listener. So, let's wrap up with a quick summary. In conclusion, Douglas Brown shows us that language learning is a blend of complexity and individuality. We cannot treat a class as one single unit. Our job is to identify their styles, equip them with strategies, and nurture their personality so they feel safe enough to take the risks necessary for mastery.